there's nothing worse than a recital where people don't applaud at all. And that unfortunately happened. You know, and I don't know, in Italy, you know, when they go to a concert or to an opera, they don't like the singer, they throw tomatoes. I mean, they do something. There's a reaction. It's still happening at La Scala in Milan, right? I mean, booing and whatever. And at St. Patrick's, you know, sometimes there was no one applauding, and I had to realize that obviously it comes down to programming, and sometimes it came down to performance quality. And one day it was confirmed to me by one of the donors who, you know, helped sponsor the performance fees for some of the recitalists. And one day he wrote to me 3 words that really affected me a lot. He wrote, "That was painful." And so that's when I realized that, you know, I no longer, as now managing this recital series, I could no longer just accept people based on a cassette tape recording or a CD that they would send me of supposedly they're playing, and then, you know, schedule them if they played well enough or what. It needed to become a lot more personal. You know, what kind of person are they? Because usually I discovered that people play the way that they are. And that applies to everything, the way that people sing. Usually they sing as they are. If they are a beautiful singer, they are usually a beautiful person, as in generous and caring and sincere. And what I was confronted to was basically a niche of a market where, you know, where some of the people were socially inept and awkward, and their programming was just as awkward and lacked appeal. And there's something about New Yorkers that if they don't like something, they just ignore you, and you are, you know, they don't throw tomatoes at you, but they just, you know, will not applaud even. And so I realized that, you know, what have I learned in my career as a student about recitals, about programming, about, you know, promoting and things like that. And I realized that in this day and age, we could no longer afford to have recitals that turn people off to the organ, right? Because if you turn them off to the organ, they're basically turned off to the entire service that we do on Sundays. They're basically turned off. They will not come to organ recitals. They will avoid coming on Sundays when the organ is featured, right? They will leave early. They will, I mean, you know, and we just don't want that. And so I realized that, you know, when I was a student, the topics of programming were, the topic singular of programming was almost never addressed. What we had to learn specific repertoire, you know, as students, and we had to cover all that. And it's a good thing, because the more you learn about different types of repertoire, the more knowledgeable you are as an organist, and you must go through that training. It's essential. But then you get out of school, you go out in the world, and you want to play concerts. But then you can't program the same thing that you did in school, because that academic kind of playing isn't necessarily interesting to a regular public, right? But you can also, you have to play music that is immediately appealing to others, right, as well. So you don't want to do just all feel-good music, you want to do probably a variety. Anyway, I realized that there was a lot that I didn't know. And now that I was in charge of that series, how could I avoid these recitals where no one applauded, and where, you know, some of the donors would send me a text that said, that was painful, right? So I realized I needed to understand even why do we have organ recitals? What's the point of them? You know, and so I started thinking about that and asking other people in New York who had organ recital series, and I started picking their brains, and when did it start, and how do you select people? Do you turn away people who ask, you know, for the opportunity to play? And some of the answers that I received were really mind-blowing to me. But the advice that I got was incredibly precious, and it has helped me understand what to look for, and also what to tell people who apply to play on the Kilgan organ at St. Patrick's, what we expect from them as well in terms of programming. Because what is the point of us having a recital if people are not excited by it, and if people don't encounter beauty, right? When people come to church, we want them to encounter joy, beauty, and feel something that they don't encounter otherwise in their daily lives, right? And you certainly want them to love the organ. You want them to want to go back to their churches, wherever they live, and want to hear the organ and be excited about it. And then when the vestry or the finance committee says, hey, our organ needs a renovation, or our organ needs repairs, or our organ needs a new, something or other, then they're likely to give and support it, right? So, I will share with you some of the thoughts that I have developed over the last 17 years about this very complicated topic, but it actually is simpler than you think. I think once you understand, you have to understand why it's important to do recitals. So why organ recitals in a church setting? Well, there are several reasons. One of them is to showcase the instrument. A church that has a pipe organ should show pride in it, and should, want to highlight its beauty, its versatility, and the power of its church organ. I like to compare. Some people call the organ the king of the instruments. I like to call it personally an orchestra in a box, and one person can just make something absolutely delightful come out of this machine and enchant people. So the first mission of an organ recital is to showcase its instrument with pride. The second one is community engagement, and basically the purpose is to offer cultural enrichment to the congregation and to the wider community. And that, by the way, has always been the mission of the Christian Church, to be the sponsor of culture, going back to the Sistine Chapel, when they had Michelangelo paint the walls of the ceiling, right? Being stewards of culture has always been part of the church, no matter what its denomination is. It's always a beacon of culture. And then the third one is outreach and evangelism. It is included in the outreach programs, usually to attract new visitors to the church. And usually in a non-threatening environment, and hopefully in a very pleasurable one, right? And that is the key, is what people are going to hear at these events should bring them joy, or at least something that they enjoy about it, right? The fourth goal is to provide performance opportunities for local, regional, and national organists, and sometimes international organists, depending on the venue. Another goal is to increase fundraising potential, right? Churches are willing to host organ recitals to hopefully bring in new members eventually, attract people to their church, and just stimulate a thirst for more culture. But obviously the goal for fundraising is to generate revenue for music programs, usually organ recitals. The proceeds will go to fund a music program or help buy new music, new handbells, you name it. It also helps raising funds for the organ maintenance and other church initiatives. And then finally, it's an artistic expression of the church within its community. It promotes a rich tradition of organ literature and also sometimes new compositions. So the cultural aspect is also prominent. So programming strategies, and basically what I ask now people who I I accept into the waiting list, because we have a waiting list now stretching to 2031. Because, well, the organ at St. Patrick's became so unreliable. We ended up, I would say, starting about 2 years ago, needing to have a technician, an organ technician on site every Sunday to address malfunctions that kept coming in. And that became such a financial burden that we decided to discontinue the organ recitals, unless a donor specifically would help pay for 2 hours of the technician coming on site. So we ended up only doing 8 recitals last year, because that's all we could afford technically in the budget to have a technician. And then this year we basically only had 2 or 3. And that's again because it was a financial consideration. But so now when I ask people who I accept into the waiting list, I said, well, I'll reach out to you when it's time to start scheduling a recital. I will expect very specific things in the program that you will propose, and it needs to meet certain criteria. And so what I propose to you church leaders is that if you are going to have organ recitals, that you define the goals in writing for what you want to accomplish artistically and also financially for the organ recital series. So what is the primary purpose of your series? For example, is it artistic excellence, community outreach, education, fundraising, or all of the above, right? I think it's clear, it's important to be clear about why you're doing it and what the expectation from the church leadership is. And if so, then you probably will want a certain caliber of organists to come in and play recitals. People who will either have a big name that will draw a crowd, or people that are guaranteed to deliver what is the word I've heard? A barn fire recital, or what is it called? In a good way, like a barn burner of a recital. There you go. A barn burner. Thankfully, I've occasionally received that feedback from some of the donors. Now, this was a barn burner, thank you. And that's the kind of text I like to receive from them. But then you need to define also who is your target audience. Are they organ enthusiasts, the general public, families? What are the demographics of your church and of your target audience? It could be all of the above. In that case, you probably want someone who's going to present a program that has something for everyone, a varied program, but that is accessible, still high quality, but accessible and not like the complete works of J.S. Bach, or God forbid, the complete works of Messiaen or something esoteric like that, right? But you need to be clear on what it is that you're looking for when you set out to have organ recitals, because it will heavily influence repertoire choices. And then also repertoire selection, that's the heart of every recital. So variety is key. Historical periods, Baroque, Classical, Romantic, 21st, 20th century, these are good to include. Nationalities, there are French, German, English, American, Canadian composers who write great music for the organ. Some of them are also South American composers that are starting to make names for themselves in the organ repertoire, so that's exciting, fresh styles. And then moods and tempi, also you want someone to propose a program that has both virtuosic pieces, also and pieces that are more reflective and lyrical in nature. So it's good that it's not all toccatas and fugues and all that. It needs to have, I think, a lot of variety. Also, there are several different forms. There's toccatas, fugues, chorale preludes, sonatas, suites, transcriptions. Transcriptions, by the way, tend to be really successful at organ recitals. They are hard, and the people who play them tend to be very good at what they do. But transcriptions are often very well received because they are of music that people are likely to have heard. I hate to Massachusetts, and I would say bar none, the most popular piece on the program that I played was a transcription of the Brahms Hungarian dance number 5 in F sharp minor on the organ. That was what people loved the most. I mean, they loved everything. They liked everything. Everyone mentioned the Brahms. Not an organ piece, but it works as a transcription. And so, having some of that in a program sprinkled in is usually a good sign. And then, there's also liturgical versus secular music. You probably want to have a balance. It shouldn't all be sacred, all be chorale preludes of Bach, hymn tunes that haven't been sung in 300 years. It should, maybe there could be one, a brief one, one that is immediately accessible, and then other things that are not necessarily sacred. And then consider the organ. What do the specifications of the organ tell you the organ is good for? What are the strengths and weaknesses of your instrument? Right? Is it in good condition? Is it in so-so condition? Is there a certain kind of repertoire that should be avoided, such as like fast repeated chords that tend to cause ciphers right now and all that. So you probably want the performer to avoid pieces that might trigger some issues during the concert. Are there also certain stops, solo stops that don't work so well, or that may not be reliable, or that has a lot of dead notes? The performer should know that so that they can program around that. Also, the acoustics. How does the hall, the church, support different types of repertoire? Right? For example, if someone is going to play some Baroque contrapuntal music, is the room very clean, or is it very reverberant to the point that sometimes you can't quite distinguish counterpoint? Reverberation is really good for romantic works, right? So maybe the performer, if you have a very reverberant room, could propose more romantic pieces than, say, crystalline Baroque stuff. Also, consider the performer's strengths. Allow the guest artist to play to their individual strengths while offering suggestions based on your instrument, right? And usually someone who's really good has several different types of repertoire at their disposal, that they could play something that you feel would really showcase the organ and their talents. Thematic programming, it's optional, but it's effective. For example, you have a concert that focuses on a living composer, that happens to live in your town and that is prolific at writing for the organ and happens to write really good music. Or you could do, all Baroque composers if you have a Baroque organ at your church. The different. Sometimes even some romantic music works well on a Baroque organ. Once I played a Schumann canon for pedal piano, which is often performed on the organ, on a French Baroque organ, and some of the people thought, that's insane. You can't play Schumann on a French Baroque organ, but I ended up showing them wrong, that actually you can, and it sounds really good, and it's a comical piece. It was the B minor canon, which is, really fun to listen to, and it was sort of a palate cleanser. It wasn't really something that I would have played, like I would not have played a fugue of Schumann, like one of the Schumann fugues for the organ, that would not have sounded so good on a French Baroque organ. But anyway, right options, variety. There could also be topical programming, such as music for Advent, or organ and dance, and then there could also be collaborative numbers in the program, organ and brass, or organ and choir, or organ and soprano, organ and tuba. Once at St. Patrick's, actually, with a friend of mine, we did on a Sunday this summer, we did a prelude where we improvised. She played the saxophone and I played the organ, and she improvised on the hymn tune "Jesus Loves Me," and we just we knew we had 3.5 minutes, and we just went along with it. And I followed where I figured she was going, and she adapted to what I was doing, and it was delightful. And organ and saxophone is an unlikely combination, but the contrast of colors works really well, actually. So, collaborations are great. And then a factor to consider is audience accessibility. Familiar versus new. There should be some well-known pieces in the program to draw people in and introduce them as well into new works. For example, in the program where I played the Brahms, I also played the Apparition of the Eternal Church by Messiaen, in fact, which was very well received by people who I'm sure had never heard of the composer or that style of music. So, variety like that works, but the balance has to be right. It cannot be too much of one thing, right? And then the duration. I have found that a 1 hour recital, including applause and possibly an encore, is often ideal. So it's great to tell an organist to aim for 50 to 55 minutes of actual music. It's also, I think, good to invite the performer to speak to the audience about the piece that they're about to hear. It helps guide how they're listening to a piece. It helps guide whether they tune it out or they stay engaged. Another transcription that I played, in fact, in Methuen on that organ there was a beautiful transcription of Samuel Barber's Adagio for Strings. And the BBC has called it the saddest piece ever written, which I think is, they need to expand on that because it may turn off people and say, you know what, then if it's sad, I don't want to hear it. I have enough sadness in my life. But I was able to frame it as one of the most emotionally resonant works of the 20th century. And how it might seem sad, but it can also be very hopeful. And it all depends on how you look at it and how you decide to feel it. And it was very well received as well. So, so then structuring the program order, it's important to have, for the opening, something that is engaging and substantial, something that showcases the beautiful, fun, bright sound of the organ. There needs to be a logical and pleasing progression of pieces, and that's what I call the flow. It's important to avoid too many pieces in the same key or of the same tempo consecutively. It's also good to maybe have the more serious works in the beginning and then have the lighter works and transcriptions and things that will make people, feel happy toward the end of the concert, because that tends to leave them wanting more. Right? Also contrast. It's good to juxtapose different styles, moods, and dynamics. And then there needs to be a climax as well. The program needs to build towards a strong and satisfying conclusion where people feel, yes, this organ sounds gorgeous, and that piece makes me feel enthusiastic about life, basically, right? And that is important in the programming. And now the encore is a tricky thing. Some people say, hey, can I play an encore? I like to say, well, it depends on how much applause you get, really. An encore is something that you do if you feel that people really want more. But if people don't really seem to want that much more, I don't think you should play one. But feel free to prepare one just in case. But it should be short, I find, and it should be an impactful piece that can serve as an encore only if the audience demands it. But it doesn't be short. Because once people realize, oh, there's an encore, oh my goodness, how much longer is that going to be? Should I make a quick exit? So if you are going to do an encore, it needs to be short. And it needs to be impactful. Like, it could be impactful because either it's flashy or it's absolutely gorgeous. Bring out the oboe, the tremolo, and all of that, and it's just a delightful little ditty. Right? It just needs to be exquisite. It needs to make people feel like it was worth staying longer for. Otherwise, you ruined it. And I found that some people have ruined it because they decided to play another piece that no one was asking for, and it was, so, yeah. All right, then the execution, making it happen. That's when you need to have a lot of organization, right? And a lot of communication with the church administration and leadership. So a huge consideration is the budget and the funding. Artist fees. It's important to be realistic about what you can offer. So for example, you might want to have Olivier Latry from Notre Dame Cathedral, play at your church, but I have a budget of $500. That's the end of the conversation. So, you need to maybe contact an artist agent and find out, what would be an approximate fee for this person, any additional fees such as lodging, things like that need to be included. Find out so that you can, where you're starting from and what realistic options you have. Travel and accommodations, that's essential to cover for out of town artists, because otherwise they eat into their fee significantly. Hotels nowadays are so expensive for what you get. I don't know what happened since the pandemic. It's crazy.
$300 a night.
God, hotels that used to be, 80 because they were okay, middle of the road, but now they're like 200 a night. It's something. And so it needs to be included for out of town artists. Publicity and marketing is essential for attendance. No one will come if they don't know about it. So whether it means that you ask the local newspaper to announce it, or the local radio stations to mention it, maybe include a little bit of a soundbite of the organ playing, something that draws people in. It is essential. Certainly in the bulletin at the church for a few weeks before the event, it is essential. And then there are printing costs for programs and posters. The cathedral decided already 10 years ago not to have the organ recitals programs printed professionally. So then we started printing them in-house. It is free, except that we pay like 2 pennies per copy or whatever the agreement is with the copier lease rental, but we do it in-house. But for a major concert, you want something that looks nice, and so you need a budget for that. And sometimes nowadays, you can outsource to someone out of town, and then they can FedEx to you or UPS to you the programs that were printed, right? So sometimes you can do some bidding, and get better pricing from a smaller town, somewhere, or sometimes from a bigger town where they can also deliver it very quickly. And then posters also we live in a visual world, so if you have a poster, I would say having the photo of an artist, being so prominent on a poster is only so effective nowadays because most people will not necessarily recognize a face, and that's not necessarily going to be a draw. I think showcasing the organ is very effective, maybe of course the photo of the artist, but something on it that really excites people to want to come, like an evening you will not forget, or timeless echoes of the best music, something that is that creates a vision and something that people will want to experience, right? As opposed to just a name and come as you are or whatever, those things just don't work anymore. Think creatively about that. And organ maintenance, it's important for instrument reliability, but it also needs to be scheduled before the artist arrives so that the artist can practice unimpeded and uninterrupted, right? Actually, when I was in Methuen, they had done everything right. The organ had been maintained and tuned 3 days before the recital, and then temperature went above 100, which in the Northeast, by the way, is extremely rare. And the hall is un-air conditioned. So you can imagine what happened. The organ went sharp, and at different rates, the reeds went way sharp, the foundations went all that, and so the organ had to be retuned the afternoon right before the recital. And fortunately, I had finished practicing, and I was ready to go, and I was all done. And then the technician ended up retuning the entire organ. He was able to get someone else to do the keys with him and just go much faster. Making sure that the instrument is at its best is usually the best practice when you have recitals. And then identifying possible funding sources is important, whether it's in the church budget or grants as well from foundations or a local business, a local bank, a local school, you never know, patron donations, and ticket sales if applicable. Sometimes churches don't want to charge tickets. They feel that it's part of their outreach, and therefore they don't seek that kind of revenue. But most people seeking quality entertainment should not balk at tickets being charged for an organ recital, especially if you're bringing in, someone that will deliver the barn burner recital. Artist selection and communication. It's important to consider local talent. I think it's a sign of goodwill, it's a sign of being engaged with your community. When you nurture relationships with organists in your area, it also creates a network of support and of friends who might also invite their church to come to your recital as a cultural event. For regional and national artists, it's, I think, a prestigious thing when you can do that, and it's good to explore opportunities for established performers. And then there's also emerging artists, so the younger musicians who are recently out of school, who won a major competition, and these artists tend to have really good chops, so they're excellent. They also tend to have really good programming nowadays, because I find that the level of teaching in organ schools has gotten so much more aware of what to do once you leave school. And so programming also tends to be better nowadays among young organists, so that's something I'm happy to see. And it's good to also state publicly when you are providing a platform for promising young musicians. It's also part of the future of our profession, right? We want to encourage young organists to perform, to be visible, and to have something to promote as well. And young people now, by the way, are really good at promoting themselves on social media. It's like innate, it's no effort for them. Like a selfie at the console, I'm all set, just finished registering, come and see me at 7 p.m. I mean, they're really good at that, and it's the future. And then it's, as I was mentioning earlier about with organ technicians, having a contractual agreement with them, it's essential, I think, when you hire someone to play a recital, especially a high-profile event, to have a clear contract or agreement with them or with their agent that outlines fees, travel, programs, expectations, and technical needs. Certainly when they can practice, when they cannot practice. It's very important to do that. And it's always essential, it's the best practice anyway in any profession, to maintain timely communication. Respond promptly to artist inquiries and provide necessary information such as organ specifications, practice times, those sort of things. Usually a rule of thumb nowadays in business is when you get an email, you should respond within 24 hours. That's the business. And unfortunately, some people, like the technicians that you referenced, do not abide by that. And that says a lot about them. And therefore, I think that's a red flag. And same thing, though, if an artist doesn't respond to you within 24 hours, I think there's also potentially a problem. Like you say, I need your program by such and such a date, and it's not in by that date. then need to give their agent a phone call or give them a call and say, I need your program yesterday. What is the hold up? When can I expect the program? And usually people don't get to a certain level of prominence if they are not also punctual, in their dealings. So, and then there's also the logistics about venue preparation, organ tuning and maintenance. Schedule this well in advance of the recital so that it's locked in. Exactly when the technician will come, when the organ will be done, and available for practice, etc., etc. Lighting, ensure adequate lighting is available for the organist and for the audience to read programs, right? Also available for when the organist is practicing. And in the winter especially, it's important to have maybe a little heat as well in the sanctuary for when the organist is practicing, after hours at night. It's important to plan that. Sound, is there any additional amplification that is needed for introductions or spoken elements? Like maybe talk to the audio person and make sure that there is a mic, and maybe that they schedule the testing of the mic with the artist in person so that in case there's any issue it can be addressed, right? But it's already planned well in advance. Seating, arrange for comfortable and accessible seating. So yes, make sure that there is a little heat for the concert if it's cold, or a little air conditioning for the concert if it's really hot, right? So that the audience is comfortable. And I would add actually that for seating, if you are going to be charging tickets, you can sometimes charge a little more money for what is called premium seating. Right? Everybody does it on airplanes, in movie theaters too. People will pay for accessibility. If you reserve, say, the front two pews on both sides of the center aisle, for people who pay a supplement, people will pay for that because people like to see, a performer up close and personal. But that's if you charge tickets, right? And again, it depends on the venue, it depends on how the church feels about it. But that's something that I have seen and that has been quite profitable for people who have organ recitals. At St. Patrick's, we do not charge for tickets, so there's no money. That's not something that I personally have experienced. It's something that I have witnessed when I've been invited to their recitals, and occasionally they've added chairs like really close to where I'm playing, so it feels a little bit very close. But I understand it. It ends up being part of my fee, and the church needs to raise funds, and so that's what it is. Restrooms. Ensure that they're clean and accessible. And so that's usually a talk with facilities, right? To have and to schedule, make sure that, there's toilet paper, oh my goodness. Toilet paper needs to be available. I'm sure some of you remember the Seinfeld episode, Can You Spare a Square? That's actually happened at a church once where I was playing a recital and there was an intermission, and it was supposed to be a 10-minute intermission, and they were like, oh, there's an issue with one of the restrooms, we can't start yet, please hold. 15 minutes later, it's still not started. I was like, what's the hold up? I said, well, there's no toilet paper in the ladies' bathroom, and we're about to run out in the men's bathroom. So and-so went to CVS to buy toilet paper, and we're waiting for them to get back, and now people have to go to the bathroom. I know it's not interesting, but it happens, and sometimes churches don't plan ahead for these sort of events, right? So, accessibility. Consider the needs of those who are disabled, and therefore, is there a ramp? Are there accessible restrooms, etc.? And then, the next important point is publicity and marketing. I said earlier that it is essential. We have to let people know about the event. So high quality promotional materials. The good news is that they cost less and less, right? Nowadays you can include beautiful images of organ and artists and all of that, and that kind of thing, to assemble it is less and less expensive. It's also easier to do it yourself nowadays with a computer and different applications where you can draw something very attractive and then you can send it to Kinko's and they will print it on a ginormous piece of glossy paper. So that's something worth considering and worth doing. Use all the church communication channels such as bulletins, newsletters, websites, social media, local media as well, such as newspapers, being on their calendars, radio station announcements, community event listings, email lists. Build and utilize an email list of interested attendees. Right? That's, I think, essential, even though not everyone opens emails in a timely fashion. It's also something that is important because the more visibility you have, and the more people see it, oh yeah, that's right, there's more resale at church. You know, the more channels you can hit, the better. Partnerships. Collaborating with local music schools could be very good. With arts organizations or other churches, that can lead to, you know, a shared audience kind of arrangement. It can be very beneficial. And then also sending out personal invitations. You know, encourage your congregation members to invite friends and family. People are more likely to come out if they receive a personal invitation from you or from congregants, you know, to their friends. That's something worth encouraging. Which is the kind of thing we would do, by the way, for any fundraising event, right? We would send out personal invitations to people who are more likely to donate. And I think treating organ resales a little bit more like a fundraising event tends to lead credence and you know, legitimacy to what you're doing. Now, on the day of the recital, there are certain things that need to be prepared and prepare for execution. So it's good to set up a team of volunteers, ushers, program distributors, and hospitality people. Say, welcome, so glad you're here. You know, pick whatever seat you want. Oh, you have a premium ticket. Go right to the front of the nave there and grab the seat that you want. Program handouts. Make sure that the programs are clear, legible, and informative. Program notes are optional, especially if the artist is going to speak to the audience. If the artist is not interested or is uncomfortable because of a language barrier issue, or they just don't like to talk, maybe, you know, having some brief program notes in the program is a good thing to include. Always include the artist's bio, you know, and the organ specifications are always a good thing to include, because there's always people who are interested. Oh, what's that stuff I heard? You know, is there a real 32? You know, that sort of thing. Prepare a welcome and introduction speech. It should be brief, it should be engaging, and it should be welcoming. It should come either from the church leadership or from the music director. That is important. It sets the tone for the entire evening. And then after the introduction, some people like to do a pre-concert talk, and I like to think that it should be optional. I think it's not necessarily an opportunity for a lot of people to talk, unless of course they're saying this concert is for the upcoming renovation of the organ, so there will be a special collection. Then it makes sense to have a pre-concert talk, but it should be a short talk then about the exact purpose of this talk, right? It should be about the organ, it should certainly be about the music and how it can enhance the audience experience. Otherwise, it's best to leave it out. A post-concert reception is also a nice thing. The prospect of free food and free drink is a major draw for a lot of people. So, but that's a lot of work, right? A simple reception. Even though it can foster a community and allow attendees to meet the artists, it also has a cost. It should ideally look really good, worth staying for. It should, you know, be beautifully arranged, maybe a few flowers on the tables, you know, you name it. So that is all worth planning for. And then it's good to also have a feedback mechanism. Maybe include a QR code or an email address, in the program that invites people to go to a short survey or send you some kind of comments on their experience. You never know what you might learn. Most of the criticism is usually constructive, it's good to know how what we do is received, right? And we may think that we're targeting the right audience, and then we might learn actually, well, maybe we're not. This perhaps should not be marketed to families with kids, or maybe this should be marketed to families with kids. You never know. It's good to invite feedback. It makes people feel heard and engaged. And then after the event, it's good to have an evaluation process to debrief with your team. What went well, what could be improved, and then it's nice to also invite feedback from attendees and the volunteers, but also from the artists. Follow up to the artists. How was the experience for you? We hope it was, enjoyable, etc. And see if maybe they have constructive suggestions to make for future events. You certainly pay for their time, so asking them for feedback is very reasonable. It's also good to track attendance and engagement, to find out exactly how many people came and what was the general reception. Did people seem happy when they left? Did people seem like they wanted more? Did people just look down and not socialize after? I mean, it's good to have that kind of assessment and to definitely then go back to your administration and say, well, look, this was really well received. People lingered for a half hour and we didn't even have a reception, right? So clearly people enjoyed themselves, so this is worth doing again. It brings people in. Even if no one joined the church that night, it was still a worthy cultivation effort. And then review the financials. Did you meet your budget goals, right? If you sold tickets, did you hit the target that you were hoping for? Or did you fall short? Or did you exceed the target, right? All the things that are worth discussing after the fact. And then learn from each experience and use those insights to plan even more successful recitals in the future. So I included on the handout some resources that I think are helpful, to everyone. Certainly the American Guild of Organists website has a lot of information, resources, chapter networks, and events that can give you ideas and contact information for a lot of different people who can offer advice. Local AGO chapters are a good resource. They allow you to connect with other organists and churches in your area. They are usually also a good target audience for recitals, especially if you're going to build an email directory of your local AGO chapters, not necessarily just yours, but also the ones around you. That's usually a good source of email addresses. There's also some online organ communities on social media, although I have found that they are of dubious usefulness in terms of marketing. A lot of the conversations that go on there are usually like, have you heard that so-and-so did that? Where it's not so much, but it's still worth mentioning. We have an organ recital coming out, right? Just post about it. Don't engage in the other stuff, but at least let them know that you're doing something. What are they doing? Never mind. But it's there, those organist forums, so just post it and let them know. And it's good to also keep looking at music publishers, explore their catalogs for new and classic organ repertoire, especially for new organ works. If you want to showcase an up-and-coming composer, that's also a good place to find names for artists. And then concert management agencies, if you're seeking a professional artist, those are also, if you say you call them and say, hey, I'm like an emerging artist, someone who plays a very varied international repertoire, or someone who plays American romantic music, or someone who specializes in this. And they could definitely give you names and fees and things like that. And it's a good way to start dialogue and planning. So, now I'm open to your questions and thoughts and ideas and things that you yourself have encountered and learned, and maybe that you can teach me. Yes?
When you plan for your concert, so how do you usually program your concert? Like, do you have any repertoire, or especially when you are invited to church,
Right.
or concert series?
Right, so when someone contacts me about playing a recital at their church, I always ask, when it comes to programming, I always ask, please send me the specifications of the organ. I want to see what I'm looking at. Keeping in mind that, of course, what you see on paper doesn't necessarily translate in real life to what it should sound like, but at least you know what the instrument is capable of and all of that. And so then, say if you have a large three-manual organ with a French swell, a German positive division, and a grade that is very eclectic, then you can play German Baroque, French classic, French romantic, American contemporary music, and things very effectively. You might even be able to play Frescobaldi, well. So then I compose a program based on what I feel is possible on that organ, and I think would sound good. If you have an organ that is very English in nature, I personally don't have a lot of English repertoire, but what I know is that English organs can play French music and German music rather well. So I will then propose something that I think will sound good, even though it's an English organ or an American organ built in an English style, right? It always starts with the specifications of the organ, and usually, that's easy to provide. Yeah. And then I always ask for feedback. Do you think this program would appeal to your audience? And I welcome feedback. And sometimes, someone also already played this Mozart Andante, right? Maybe do you have another piece that you would play in its place, so that I come up with something else. Someone played this, oh great, so that substitute. It's really done a lot.
So does it have to play at least one of the church theme traditional style, like a hymn theme music?
Yes, well actually, yes. In fact I inaugurated a digital Allen organ, a 4-manual Allen organ out on Long Island 3 years ago. I want to say, it was 2022. The church said, we would like you to do 2 hymns so that people can sing. And so I have 2 hymns, one hymn at 2 different times in the program, and the first hymn was good, and then the second one was really triumphant because it was near the end, closer to the end of the program, and I want people to feel victorious. And the one church asked me to actually change the first hymn because they said we don't really know that hymn. It's not one that we sing regularly. How about that one? I said, great, you got it. And so then when I do a hymn, I soup it up a little bit. So I will usually try to have a modulation in it, between the penultimate and the last verse. And maybe for the second hymn, I will try and do a big introduction, flashy introduction that makes people go, wow, listen to those trumpets, and then people stand and then they sing. It's an opportunity to showcase the organ and to showcase, and then also to engage the audience in active, participation in that. But that needs to be agreed upon and discussed, and certainly, when the church contacts an artist, the director of music should say, hey, it would be great if you included a hymn or 2 or 3. Or maybe something on a hymn tune, if you play a fantasy on, Amazing Grace, right away, I can think that is a major winner at organ recitals actually. Yes?
Would you consider or advise to investment on live streaming systems, like the quality of sound, the quality of image, or everything for live stream recitals?
You know, I'm sad to say this has become the expectation now. And unfortunately, microphones don't do the organ justice. And in fact, we were talking about this earlier, how there are some stops whose frequency range go below the ability of the human ear to even perceive, right? The 32-foot stops is audible, but the human ear cannot hear something below 12 hertz, right? And so we basically low C at the 32-foot pitch is kind of the last thing that we can discern. After that, it's kind of a sensation, an impression that we hear something. But microphones have a narrower frequency range than a lot of human ears. So unfortunately, when you have an instrument that goes from 12 hertz all the way to almost 20,000 hertz, and considering that after the age of 45, between 45 and 50, we stop hearing anything above a certain frequency range, right? When you unfortunately stream a concert, it will not do the organ justice. However, like I said, it now has become the expectation that everything we do is streamed, right?
But if you're charging tickets, you don't want to live stream.
Right, you don't want to live stream it, but you can live stream and put a paywall.
Oh.
You know, and it's not, I think if the church live streams everything, it is what it is. But unfortunately, the church needs to understand that unfortunately the organ doesn't translate so well with microphones. You know, there are organ CDs, but the companies that record, the organ technicians that record the organs bring extremely expensive audio equipment to record organs, to capture the entire frequency range within the room, and also the reverb, right? So they need to have a second set of mics. So recording organs is so much more complex than recording a singer in a studio, right? And so, you know, that's a consideration for whether to or not to stream. I know that I don't know about organ recitals, but I know that choral organizations that stream their concerts put a paywall if they charge tickets, and most of them do charge tickets, at least in New York. So I don't know how well that would be received. I know that when I played in Methuen, Massachusetts, because it was so hot, some people said, "Is it streamed?" And the organization said, "Yes, it is streamed, but consider making a donation, you know, if you're going to stream." So yeah, it happens. And in fact, that's one of the things that we talked about with the cathedral. Now we're spending $14 million, including soft costs, on the renovation of the Kilgan organ at St. Patrick's by Casabon. And one of the things we should really do is modernize the audio equipment, the microphones that capture that sound, because, you know, certainly we do stream everything. And unfortunately, the miking of the organ is still monophonic. It's the microphones from the 1960s that are still dedicated to record this organ. There's two of them, but it all goes to the same one mono channel. So it's time for us to really join the 21st century. And we received advice from two audio technicians, and you know, to replace those mics with mics that would capture the full dynamic range of the organ. It would actually require 6 mics, because we have the organ is actually in 3 locations, right? So it would require 6 mics, and it would cost $175,000. Yeah.
Well, that's a drop in the bucket compared to 16 million.
Of course, yeah. 14 million, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. No, and we are talking about it to the trustees and said, and said, by the way, you know. and you know, for them, they're billionaires. I mean, they also are the ones who want to keep streaming because they spend all their weekends either out in the Hamptons or at their house in Vail or in Palm Beach, you know, and they like to watch Mass, and therefore they can say, oh yeah, I go to church at St. Patrick's.
Video live stream.
I go, exactly,
Yeah.
via live stream. So, you know, for them, certainly $175,000 would be nothing. But it's still convincing them that it's worth doing for the quality of the sound. You know, it's not something tangible, right? Sound is just this, that if you're not a musician, you don't fully appreciate. But no, we were talking about it, and that's how it starts, talking about it, you know. So, well, I don't want to keep you, it's 5:04, we are, but you're all so interested in all that. I thank you for your presence and participation, and I wish you all luck with your organ recital series.